Welcome back. All right, we're starting to move from some of the bigger picture theories of moral judgment that we've been looking at in more specific uh, studies of like stuff that is relevant to morality, but isn't like an overall model of how we make moral judgments. So this article is about punishment and the psychological basis of our desire to punish. So when we see an injustice, it comes along with a desire to punish the wrongdoer. And this has been studied in studies empirically and psychologically studies. Uh, it's an interesting sort of thing, right? This desire to punish many different types of actions, right? That are kind of hard to unify under one type of moral violation. We've seen, various different moral foundations posited from, right, purity violations to harms and stuff like that. But when we see a violation of morality, we all of them tend to elicit a desire to punish someone. And it happens when we're the subject of the injustice, right? When we're the one who is wronged, or when we see someone else being wronged. So it's a very broad phenomenon that covers a lot of kinds of moral transgressions. Now, we've seen sort of, we've been through the lens of dual process theory, right? We've been looking at all these moral phenomena. And if we apply dual process theory to the desire to punish, my tongue is like numb today or something. I don't know. Um, it seems like on the surface, pretty obvious that it's like a system one type process, right? Wanting to punish is like an emotional thing. It's sort of automatic. It just hits you. It doesn't require inferences, or you don't have to reason about whether you feel like someone should be punished. Right? It hits you. Uh, Darley, the author of this article, compares it to visual perception, in that the desire to punish kind of comes on fast, and you don't have to do any inferences, right, or do any reasoning for it to hit you. And whatever happened to make you feel like you wanted to punish someone, you can't really look inside and see what was going on there. There are these lower level processes not available for perception. Also, like perception, we take our moral anger at face value, right? So if I perceive a cow, say, oh, there's a cow there. I don't really question it. And similarly, if I have a desire to punish someone, I kind of assume they're bad and deserve to be punished, right? I typically don't question that. So it sort of presents itself as just kind of obviously true. So it's worth looking into the system one, right, understanding of the desire to punish, perhaps. So uh, some system one processes do seem to assign a valence to an object or a state of affairs in the world. So there's all kinds of different system one processes. Moral ones, certainly, they assign a valence, good or bad, morally good or bad. Um, Arguably, right, our judgments about art, aesthetic judgments, right, are also might also be system one judgments, right? They just sort of come to us, right, and we just sort of like it. Like you hear music, and either you like it or you don't. You don't have to think, well, is that what key is that in? Do I like C minor? Oh, I do, so I guess I like this song. It's nothing like that, right? So seems to be a number of system one processes that sort of it's an immediate like good or bad kind of thing reaction. And if you believe in Haight's theory, right, he's given us some evidence that those types of reactions in the moral domain aren't reasons based, right? So all these scenarios that are carefully crafted so that you have no reason to judge this thing as bad, right? No one's being harmed, so on. As examples of like your pet dies, eating your dead pet, right? Or the harmless incest scenario, right? And people will eventually admit, yeah, I got no reason for why I think it's wrong, but I still think it's wrong. So he thinks that's pretty good evidence that your system two is not operating there because there's literally no reason for it, right? Okay. And the different trolley problems. I wouldn't push the guy off the bridge, but I would pull the lever. Why? I don't know, right? And we've seen Green's neural studies, right, that suggest that system one moral judgments are produced in situations where there's a personal element going on. So again, pushing the guy, we don't want to do it, right? Pulling the switch in the trolley problem, sure. And then in the trickier sorts of problems, both processes kick in. First, we have an initial system one judgment, and then we have um, then afterwards activity of the brain associated with reasoning, right? That sort of post hoc judgment. So this is all familiar territory, right? We're sort of applying it to this desire to punish, which seems to be a similar sort of process. So some more questions, right? Figuring out, well, what is the nature of this desire to punish? Uh, what is it driven by, right? Is it driven by the severity of the moral transgression or something else, right? Could it be driven by utilitarian considerations, right? Do we want to punish someone if we think they're causing more harm, or do we want to punish them because we think they've just done something bad, right? Um, and you can study this by giving, in a lot of these, all these studies are more or less the same because you can't go around, right, harming people and, and seeing how subjects react. So you just have to tell them a story. Um, so you come up with a scenario, right, and you can manipulate them, uh, like more personal culpability or more severe effects of the moral harm, right, and adjust the scenarios and see what people's reactions are. And so it seems like, for example, if you tell a scenario about someone who does something bad, and then you give them some information that suggests that that person is probably going to do it again and again, uh, that doesn't actually seem to affect the punishment that they want to assign that person as much as the severity of the offense, right? So that seems to suggest that utilitarian considerations, right, thoughts about future total harms, are not really a main driver of the desire to punish. Instead, it's something retributive. We see that someone has done a bad thing, and that whatever bad thing they did, that's the main thing that's driving the desire to punish, not preventing future harms. And now, when studies about subject reactions to the seriousness of a crime, what does that mean, right? Does it mean that a great harm was caused to the victim, or is the seriousness related to the perpetrator's intentions, right? And it's hard to tell often in normal everyday cases because the two will come together, right? So I want a bike and I intentionally steal your bike, and that part's wrong. I had bad intentions. But also in stealing your bike, I've harmed you, right? You're down a bike, and that's also wrong. So like, peel apart like which produces the desire to punish. But again, in the lab, we can concoct scenarios that will adjust the amount of, intent and the amount of harm, right? So, for example, in one scenario, a person intends to commit murder and then shoots someone, right, intentionally and kills them. And in another one, the person intends to commit murder, shoots the person, but then a crow flies in front of the bullet and stops the bullet. So the bird dies, but the person lives, right? And you can ask scenarios, who should be punished or how severely should they be punished? And most people will say in the situation where he intended to kill, but he didn't kill because the bird blocked it, people say, yeah, that's still immoral, and that person still deserves punishment for intending to kill, even if they didn't kill. Uh, and the type of punishment is typically similar in both cases, right? So it seems to suggest that intention is the main driver of punishment, but there is a difference. They do give a lighter version of that. So, if the person said, oh, the punishment should be, a prison sentence, so that's kind of the same and for both, but they might say, okay, the person that ended up actually killing them will get a longer sentence than the person that ended up killing the bird instead, right? But so there is a difference, but it seems like the main driver is the intention. So here's a study described in a little more detail, right? So these people were in an MRI, like getting brain imaging done, and they're given these three different scenarios. So the first one is someone intentionally poisons a person by putting poison disguised as sugar in their coffee. So intent to kill and does kill or poison. Uh, Second scenario, someone thinks they're poisoning a person by putting poison disguised as sugar in the coffee, but they get the wrong bag and they just put normal sugar in the coffee. Right? So sort of like the bird blocking the bullet, there's an intent to harm, but they get foiled and they don't actually do any harm. And then C, someone doesn't intend to harm, and it's just the sugar bag and the poison bag are right next to each other, and they accidentally put the poison in the coffee they meant to put. So no intent to harm, but actual harm is done. So what do subjects think of these, right? Well, subjects thought that only the people in the first two scenarios should be punished, right? The person that accidentally put poison in the coffee. People don't think should be punished, right? And then what did the brain imaging say? Well, it showed activity in the area of the mind, or in the area of the brain associated with theory of mind. We talked about theory of mind before, right? The way that we understand what people are thinking, what their intentions are, right? You use it all the time, right? If you've ever dated before, you say, I think does this person like me? You're trying to figure out if they like you, and should you ask them out, right? That's theory of mind. Um, oh, I just tripped. Do people are they're laughing at me? Do you think, right? Are they theory of mind? Okay, so anyway, so that part of your brain is lighting up, is more active uh, when you're trying to figure out the scenarios, which indicates they're trying to figure out, right, what was the other person thinking, what was their intention. So again, intention seems to be the driver of. There's also game theoretic approaches to punishment. So these happen in psychology and also in behavioral economics. So they'll cook up these games where you can actually win and lose actual money. Um, and so you can set these games up so that you allow players to sort of commit moral transgressions, or what people would consider to be moral transgressions when they're playing in the game. And then you can allow other players to punish people, right, who transgress. And often one or more of the players will be what they call a confederate, like one of the researchers posing as one of the subjects, right? So they can steer the game in certain ways that they want to manipulate certain variables. Um, Now you do kind of have to worry about, there's usually not a ton of money, right, that floating around for these studies, and but if the amount of money won and lost is too small, then that's going to uh, affect, right, how seriously people take it. So there does have to be enough money. So some of the studies do make it a significant amount of money, right? And also, if everyone's totally anonymous, that can kind of mess with how people behave too. So you do try to, if you can, get people in a lab, you know, or whatever. So here are some of the kinds of games they use in these studies, right? So the simplest one is just you offer a pile of money between two players and you have them split it according to some simple rule. So what happens is one player will propose the split, like whatever they choose, right? So they say, I propose we split it 50-50. I propose I get it all and you get nothing, right? I propose I get 80% and you get 20%, whatever, right? You can propose whatever you want. And then the other person can either accept or reject your proposal, right? If they accept it, then you get whatever the proposal was, right? And if you reject it, then both people get nothing, right? So the interesting thing about this, right, is just from a purely game theoretic perspective, right? If the other person proposed to me a 90-10 split where I get 10%, well, if I reject it, I get nothing, so I should probably accept, right? $10 or whatever it is better. 10% is better than 0%. That's not what people do, right? If the other person offers them anything less than like 25 to 30%, they will right, they will reject it, meaning the other person gets nothing, right? So in essence, they're willing to spend money to punish the other person who made what they saw as an insulting or maybe immoral offer, right? And if you look at, again, the brain activity, what's going on, it's emotional areas of the brain that are activated when they reject these offers. And interestingly, if they know that the offer is being made by a computer, no emotional brain activity, and usually they will take the money, right? So if it's a computer game, the computer says, I will, I'm going to give you 10, I'm going to keep 90. You say, okay, whatever, 10 is better than 0, right? You tend to play more rationally when you're playing against a computer. When you're playing against people, you get mad when they're trying to screw you over, and you'll pay money to punish them. Another version of these studies is what's called trustee games, right? So the way this works is I start with a certain amount of money, and I can give my money to another player, and when I do that, the amount of money will be quadrupled, right? And then the other player, if they want to, can give me some money back, right? So it works out the best for me if I give a bunch of money to the other player, right? It's quadrupled, and then they give me, you know, half back, then I just double my money, right? But they don't have to give me that money back if they don't want to. And there's lots of variations of the game. So sometimes, if B doesn't give me back what I think I've deserved, I can punish B with a fine, right? There's versions that don't allow punishment. There's versions that only allow like a symbolic punishment, right? Where you don't actually get any, they don't, it doesn't hurt them with money, but like they get flagged as a nasty person or whatever. Um, or there's versions where I have to pay to punish the person. And then there's versions where I'm told that the other player is just a computer. Right? When it costs me nothing to punish, right, I will tend to punish B with more than the amount of units owed. So what that means is, right, so suppose I had 50 bucks, I gave it to B and it got quadrupled, so now B has 200 and I'm expecting 100 back, right? I think that's fair. And suppose B doesn't give me that back. Well, typically in these studies, I'm going to fine B like 200 bucks or 150 bucks. Like I'm going to fine them more than they owed me in the first place. Now, if it costs me something to punish them, I'll tend to punish them a little cheaper, like a little lower, but I still nearly the entire amount owed. So if I think they owe me 100 bucks, I'll still fine them like, 90 bucks, even if it costs me money to do that, right? And even if the punishment is merely symbolic, right, and it doesn't actually take any money from the person, I'll still punish them in that way. So if you look at their brains, what's going on when they're doing actual punishing? So this doesn't happen in the symbolic punishing, but when they're punishing the other player, again, this shows activity in the reward centers of the brain. So get off on it, right? They like punishing the other person. Interesting questions about potential cultural differences. Like this is the case with like almost all psychological studies for, I don't know, the last couple of decades, where like it was always these studies are always done on undergrads in like in universities in the United States and Britain, right? So you might ask, what about other cultures, right? Like, do people behave differently in China, in India, right, in Russia? Um, so they more recently, people have uh, tried to do some more studies, right, in different cultures. Right? And there's overall a large amount of similarity, right? You see broadly the same behavior. There are a few little interesting differences, right? There might be, in some cultures, people are willing to accept a lower amount in the split games, right? So they'll take an 80-20 split, whereas in the United States, we'd get mad at the 80-20 split and we'd want to punish them or we'd reject the offer, right? Um, so there are versions of the split game where I can't reject the offer, but the other person could just altruistically choose a fair split, right? So the game goes like, okay, it's a split thing. You get 100 bucks. Do you want to give me any? There's no punishment if you don't, right? I can't reject the offer. And often people will still say, all right, I'll give you 50-50 or I'll give you 40%. And that sort of behavior seems to be more common in the cultures where the unfair splits were punished more severely. And then in all the cultures, third parties not involved in the game directly will still spend money to punish transgressors. So just watching people play the game and seeing some unfairness, you'll spend money to punish, right, the bad guy. And that's cross-cultural. All right, so some interesting things. It does seem like the desire to punish is an emotional thing, right? It seems to be an instinctive thing. It seems to occur in lots of different cultures, and it's not really a rational thing, right? Because we will pay to punish someone even when it costs us money, right? And we will refuse to take money if we think it's unfair, stuff like that. So this seems to be an instinctive, right, basic, probably evolutionarily primitive sort of thing, right? This desire to punish. What could be the function of it, right? What could be the evolutionary benefit? Well, it seems like it would be good for group cohesion, right? If humans are social animals, we need to keep groups together. Uh, you would want to punish free riders, right? We've talked about free riders before, right? As social groups get bigger, people can slip behind the cracks and like not contribute right as much and still take all the benefits of the larger society. And you need a way to control that. Um, we see evidence of this in a different type of study where you have different groups of subjects playing different games with different rules. And some of these games allow for punishment and some of them don't, right? And so each game is going on. There's several games going on, and they're all more or less you contribute to a pool of money. Again, then get split equally at the end of the game, right? You can choose how much you contribute, right? So you could choose to contribute not very much and get a bigger payoff at the end, right? And what happens, but people are allowed to move around to different groups, right? You'll play around, you'll decide if you like this group or if you want to switch to a different group, right? And what happens is people will tend to want to move to groups where they can punish the free rider, right? Um, and in those groups, the monetary returns tend to increase too, right? In the no punishment groups, people eventually stop contributing anything and the overall returns drop. So it seems like the groups where punishment is allowed, everybody, right, does better. So if that's right, um, what follows about sort of applications in our world? Is there any application, or is it just an interesting thing about the mind? Well, there are good reasons to want our actual legal system to match our psychology, right? If you want people to obey the law and respect it, it can't stray too far from their own instincts, right? Their own intuitions about what's right and wrong. Um, and studies have confirmed correlations between how well people tend to follow the law, right? And it tends to be if the law matches your own moral sense, then you'll tend to follow it more. If it moves away from what you think is moral, then you're going to tend to follow the law less, right? One stark example of that was prohibition in the 1920s, right? So alcohol was made illegal, and people still continued to drink because a lot of people just didn't think there was anything wrong with it, right? So people will, if they think the law, right, is forbidding something that they think is perfectly fine to do, they're just going to break the law. Some have argued that we should apply this psychology to the actual legal system like more intensely, right? And let's make punishments proportional to people's actual moral intuitions, right? We have these studies, we know exactly what people's intuitions are, so why not make that the punishment, right? Um, there are problems with it. So how would we compare various crimes like numerically or whatever? Maybe you could just rank them in severity and assign the punishments according to how people's intuitions about the rankings. Um, Even then, not everyone will agree, right? So some people think that some people believe in the death penalty, right? And if you kill, you should be killed. Other people think life imprisonment. So they might agree on the ranking, right? They might say, yeah, murder is the worst crime and it deserves the worst punishment, but they might differ on what the worst punishment is. Um, Another problem is in the legal system, you kind of need what we call a classical theory of concepts when you talk about crimes, so that you have a set theoretic, right, definition of what a crime is, and that way if somebody commits an act you can say either it is a crime or is not a crime, right? That's kind of necessary for a fair legal system. The problem is actual concepts in people's heads are very rarely classical concepts, right? Bachelors are unmarried men, about the only example, right? Everything else, a chair, is it a four-legged, right, seat for one? Well, no, chairs can have two legs. Does it have to have a back? Yes or no? It's like fuzzy, right? Most of our concepts are sort of fuzzy, but you don't want it to be fuzzy when you're sending people to jail, right? So like if you had legal sentences, right, criminal sentences that followed set theory, all murders deserve, right, whatever death or life in prison. And if you wanted those punishments to be additive, like sets are, that's not going to really match up with our intuitions, right? So, what do you do about euthanasia? Even if it's illegal, most people are going to say, well, yeah, it's killing. I guess technically it's murder, but like, I don't think the person deserves life in prison for it. Um, so it's not obvious, right, or straightforward how we could make use of this information from psychology and apply it to the legal system, but it seems like maybe it could help. And Darley, this author, at least argues that social scientists maybe should be included in the drafting of criminal codes. It would make people in general more law-abiding if we had, some psychologists who know how people's minds work, helping, in on figuring out sentences. So we've seen so far that our moral intuitions are largely right. Um, That is, we don't take a utilitarian view, which is that the point of punishment is to produce better consequences in the future. And our legal system is sort of split between these, but it is largely rehabilitation-oriented corrections, right? So the idea is the point is not to punish someone and be mean to them for committing a crime, but the idea is the reason we're putting them in prison is to correct them, make them better so that when they come out, they will stop doing harm to people. Now, how effective is that? Um, a lot of people go into prison and become uh, more hardened criminals because of the way prisons are in our country. But anyways, that's the general idea is rehabilitation. It's a very utilitarian approach. But that's not really uh, broadly how our brains work, right? Our brains just want to punch you back. Um, so, I mean, is retribution, pure retribution, an appropriate way to run a legal system? Um, Maybe not, right? Well, Darley says, fortunately, we don't have to worry about it too much. Uh, First of all, research shows us that deterrence doesn't work. So even if punishments ought to be aimed at preventing future crime, it just so happens that most criminals don't worry about getting caught, right? So um, now he doesn't say much about the effect of right prison as some sort of corrective thing. I've suggested that the way it is right now, it's not super helpful either, right? So idea being, even if our legal system is aimed at sort of utilitarian, consequentialist concerns, it's not very good at it, right? It's not clear how you can make it better. And then he says our brains aren't totally retributive completely, right? When we're dealing with milder crimes, often our moral intuitions do tend to favor restorative justice, right? Penalties that involve work to pay back the victim, and that hopefully that kind of thing does. I mean, that is retribution, right? Paying the victim back. That sort of action, when the criminal sort of like works together with the person that they've harmed, it also has an extra effect of actually reducing recidivism in many cases, right? So maybe you can get the best of both worlds there. Retributive psychology, but then also getting sort of consequentialist goals that many people seem to agree is at least a large part of the point of a legal system. All right, that's it for today, and I'll see you next time.